It's a heartbreaking exodus as tens of thousands of residents of Aleppo are forced from their homes. This is the latest chapter in the Syrian civil war. Since last week, tens of thousands have been evacuated from areas held by rebels who oppose Syrian President Assad. This is part of a deal that was brokered by Turkey and Russia, which supports Assad. As early as today, Assad's troops are expected to take full control of Aleppo. Caught in the middle of all of this, families who've lived in fear and now have no place to call home.
حياة اجي احكي لك انه حياة صعبة كثير صعبة، يعني ما بتصور بني ادم الشيء اللي عدى علينا بهالفترة هاي كلياتها.
انه وقت تنزل قذيفة نقول هلا بدنا نموت
The scope of the disaster is staggering. So far, it's estimated the civil war has created 4 million refugees. 250,000 people have died.
When we see the dismemberment of Syria, when we see the tragedies that are taking place there, which are heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking, while we sat by and watched all this happen, this is the sign of a possible unraveling of the world order that was established after World War II, which has made one of the most peaceful periods in the history of the world.
Yesterday, the crisis took another turn when the Russian ambassador to Turkey was gunned down by an off-duty police officer who then screamed, "Do not forget Aleppo, do not forget Syria." This is a difficult situation on so many levels. Joining me to talk about the ongoing effort to quell the violence and get help to the people who need it are Noel Arenas, Oxfam America's Director of Humanitarian Programs, Stephen Kinzer, a visiting fellow at Brown University's Watson Institute, and Nadia Alawa, founder and president of New Day Syria, a local relief organization. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Noel, I'd like to start with you. What is Oxfam doing right now in response to the current situation in Aleppo, and what might you like to be doing that you're unable to do?
Yeah. Well, Oxfam has reached more than 2 million people, both inside Syria and refugees in the neighboring countries, with relief items, relief supplies, providing access to clean water and food. Inside Syria, our work focuses on rehabilitating water infrastructure that is much needed. In places like Aleppo and Damascus, this water reaches across the lines. We feel helpless witnessing this situation and the inability of the international community to put an end to this crisis. But there's something that I think viewers should know, that the U.S. can do more. The U.S. can do more to show support and solidarity to Syrians, welcoming Syrian refugees to the U.S., enlarging the U.S. resettlement program. The U.S. has the most stringent resettlement program. We are not saying that it should, change the process in any way, a very strict screening process, but the U.S. can do more to welcome more refugees and do it faster.
The U.S. as a country might, individual Americans may or may not be able to, depending on what the Trump administration does. Nadia, I want to go to you next. Mm-hmm. New Day Syria has done a lot of work, I know, because we've spoken before with individuals who'd already fled Aleppo and had sought refuge in areas they believed were safe. How has the current battle for Aleppo changed the equation for your organization?
Well, actually, right now we are working on the ground also with the people who are being evacuated from Aleppo.
What are you doing?
We are doing basic emergency aid right now, which is food baskets with food items that can be eaten on the go and not cooked, obviously. Heaters and kerosene, blankets, the very, very basic, baby milk, obviously. But what we want to start doing is we actually also have our homes. We have different homes. We have warehouse spaces ready for shelter, but they're a little bit further away from Aleppo in Idlib. That's an area right now where there's a lot of disconcernment going on right now. What is going to happen after Aleppo? And Aleppo families are thinking, how far are we going to move away? Are we going to die this close to Aleppo or a little bit further away from Aleppo?
That was my next question for you, because my understanding is President Assad said this week in an interview that Idlib was going to become the next theater in this war. So are the people who you've been working with for months going to have to pick up from there and try to go somewhere else safe, go into Turkey? Or
I don't think anybody right now really is thinking about leaving Syria. We are negotiating building homes in a different area further up north, also near Turkey. Obviously, when you are in the non-profit work in a country like Syria, you have to think about, tomorrow, and you can't think that everybody's going to die, obviously. So we are planning for housing and for actual homes for these families. That said, what is going to happen with Idlib? That is a good question. Are we going to let Russia decide basically the world order?
Right,
there's a lot going on right now, and the U.S. is busy with Raqqa and with ISIS over there, and, people are getting killed in the meantime.
Stephen Kinzer, you have written very critically about the way the U.S. media has represented the Syrian conflict, broadly speaking, and more recently the battle for Aleppo in a piece that you did for the Boston Globe. What do you think the media tend to get wrong about this, and what should viewers know that they might not know?
Americans are very compassionate people. We hate the idea that anybody's suffering anywhere. Our leaders know that, and anyone who tries to draw the United States into a foreign war always tries to promote the idea that we're doing it to rescue suffering civilians. Behind that curtain are a whole complex of geopolitical and strategic interests. So I think it's very important that we not be drawn in by emotion into adventures that are actually likely to lead us into deeper trouble that in the long run are going to result in more children dying. So I think the first thing we need to do is not allow emotion to overwhelm diplomacy, because emotion is always the enemy of wise statesmanship.
If I recall correctly, you also wrote in the Globe this past weekend that Aleppo has been controlled, in the portions that aren't controlled by the Assad regime, has been controlled to a large extent by an al-Qaeda affiliate for a long time now that has treated the residents of Aleppo very poorly. So this is not what we're watching happen now, not a battle between good and bad, but between, and these are my words, not yours, between two bad actors. Is that a fair paraphrase of the argument you made in the Globe?
We've been given a very distorted picture of what's really happening. The good-evil narrative has really triumphed in the American press. The fact is that there's been no independent reporting of what's happening in eastern Aleppo, because anyone who had tried to do that would have been killed. So all we're getting is this one-sided reporting of people reporting these echo chamber phrases about barrel bombs and the attacks by Assad on civilians. Instead, we ought to be thinking about where we go here from now from here. So we have a situation where finally, for better or worse, the government is in control of Aleppo. We should realize that the way to improve the situation there is to work with the government. Let's drop our view that what we need to do in Syria is get rid of Assad and focus more on what ordinary people need in the wake of this tragedy.
Noelle, I see you now. Oh,
so
yes.
what we're going to do is we're going to let Russia decide what the U.S. is going to think and feel and move forward militarily, strategically, politically for a country like Syria. And as we are seeing in Syria, what happened and started in Syria 6 years ago has affected all of us. There's nobody in the world, basically, in the Western world, in the free world, that is not affected by what has been going on in Syria.
So you can't imagine, as the head of a nonprofit, you cannot imagine now working with the Assad regime to try to...
Of course we will work with anybody, because we work, and we work for humanitarian aid on the ground to help people. But the whole argument that nothing really has been happening and there have been so many bats inside eastern Aleppo, I don't really know if I believe that. We were working in eastern Aleppo until, a few weeks ago, and we were sending in containers. There was free movement until July of this summer when everything got shut down. So there's a lot of social media. There are a lot of people that have been talking from many different sides. Nobody has been shutting down information coming out.
Noelle.
I'd like to build on one point. I think we have to really go to the basics of ensuring protection and safety of the people in need and ensuring access of humanitarian aid. It's problematic that the UN Security Council seems to be renegotiating international humanitarian law when that should be a given.
As something that, in past conflicts, was Oxfam simply able to provide aid in a way it is not in this conflict?
In any conflict, aid should be, there should be access to civilians so that we can provide aid. No matter what the situation is, it shouldn't be a subject to negotiation.
Does that ring true to you, Stephen?
Insurgent groups have long since mastered the techniques of making civilians suffer as a way to bring foreign actors into these conflicts. The United States does not have a 5,000-mile screwdriver that will allow us to fix the Syria crisis. We should not allow our emotions to drag us into a political disaster that ultimately will produce more human rights violations in Syria.
Okay, given that argument, and that we have different arguments being made here, I'd like to know what each of you think the best case scenario from this point on is. If you imagine some sort of resolution which is not terrible, what would it be? And Nadia, I'd like to start with you.
Well, absolutely, clean airspace, no air attacks, and the U.S. really needs to consider that they should move forward with this. Otherwise, you're going to have, ISIS and different players and a lot of humanitarian loss.
Stephen Kinzer?
Unite with Assad and Russia to guarantee a quick end to fighting there and insist that Assad allow refugees to come back with international guarantees.
Right. Noel Arenas, last word to you.
There's a new UN resolution to allow UN monitors to oversee evacuation of civilians. That should be put in place urgently.
All right. Noel Arenas, Stephen Kinzer, Nadia Alawa, thank you all.